Shapiro response video. Why the hell that popped on here? Yes, I better do that. If my internet's fouling. It'd be great if the video won't play. Ha ha, Gary. Anyway, yeah, response video on democracy and such. So, play along.
Alright, so, you know, I've been noticing a lot, well, lately, but my whole life to a certain degree, you know, people seem to have just this totally unrealistic and false idea of what democracy is about.
Interesting. Yeah, says you. Sure, I'd argue that the word doesn't mean too much, and then people talk about democratic republics and they'll say we're a republic and all this crap. But clearly I think the idea of one man, one vote, that sort of means something to people. I mean, I think they can get that kind of idea, that that's sort of what a democracy is supposed to be. And then when you tie the word representative on there, you kind of get the idea that, oh, they're supposed to represent me. They're not supposed to be like representing them. They're supposed to be representing people. And clearly, again, I've made these arguments so many times, and you know, it doesn't mean anything to people. But the real flaw in our democracy is that we represent geography. We don't represent ideology. So we have these regional elections that basically say half the people will not have a representative. So depending on what state you live in, you're going to be part of the half that either never has a congressman, or you'll be part of the half that always has a congressman, to some extent. Again, they're compromise candidates because of the two-party system. But basically the idea is to represent people's opinions in some sort of fair way, one man, one vote kind of way. And the irony is that all these rednecks, you know, these MGTOWies or whatever, these people who don't like social justice, are the very people who like this affirmative action for the little states. You know, they want to cheat the fight because they can't win it. And they're perfectly satisfied to do that. They're perfectly satisfied to flush the idea of one man, one vote into the toilet with their electoral college cheats whenever possible. But yeah, the real game is just you get rid of the spoiler effect. You get rid of, you know, the idea that I'm my geography, that I'm not my ideology, and you get rid of the idea that we have to have a Congress that steals the representation of half the people. Half the people, every Congress is made up of a Congress that has willfully and deliberately defranchised half the people in the country and said you don't get to have somebody voice your opinion. Your opinion doesn't count. Because we're not going to allow there to be an ideological representative democracy. We're only going to represent special interests. Those are the only interests that get represented in Congress. You have to create a coalition of like-minded, segregated, essentially, people to get anywhere. I mean, if you just think about it, I mean, there's no democracy for many minorities that are not segregated. So if you don't if, you know, like I've said this before, and it's just so obvious. I mean, blacks would have so much less representation in Congress if they weren't segregated geographically. But you could just see that gay people, you know, yes, there's a higher population in a couple of cities, but generally speaking, they're spread out all over the country, so they have no representation. That's a minority voice that's maybe 10% of the population, and yet it might have 1% of its due representation in Congress. The same you go with atheism or all of these other, you know, all kinds of points of view. And again, there's just no reason to stick with a 250-year-old democracy where, you know, it took 2 days to go from New Jersey to New York. There's no reason for us to have a exclusively geographic democracy. And there's clearly no reason anymore to play some game about states' rights. It's not really about states. States aren't any threat from the federal government. Only if you think segregation is a good idea. I mean, only if you think we should migrate into individual states and hate each other that way, and that we're somehow better off being a bunch of 50 little nuclear powers, that everything will work out so much better that way, and it really won't. So it's a ridiculous idea. So anyway, that's probably enough, but I mean, this is all so fixable, just re-engineering the democracy, but it's almost a gross tragedy against the concept of democracy to call what we have a democracy, just as the socialism in communist Russia wasn't socialism. It was completely, there was the party was the privileged class, and it had nothing to do with any sincerity. And this is not a sincere effort. American democracy is not a sincere effort to either represent the truth, the majority, or the people, or any of that. This isn't we the people. This is we the special interest. We the propagandists. We the people. We the people who can engineer majorities in regions, and that's all that counts. And the policy is as diluted and as corrupt as that. And clearly the politicians are grotesque human beings. They're not even close to the kind of people, if people had a real choice, they're not the people they would vote for. Clearly, I think. But I mean, the real flaw in the democracy is it doesn't really represent the people. If you're not given a good choice, you're going to make bad choices.
And what it means to convince other people, and what are the chances that we get on the same page?
Yeah, well, it's just having a fair fight. So again, it's, whether your agenda is to convince other people or just find a tolerable compromise, in my opinion, it doesn't matter. What you should expect from the democracy is the fair fight. You should expect that you have a right to your percentage of the representation, and that they have a right to humiliate and argue with, and in any way beyond physically harming them, to degrade and insult the philosophy of your fellow human beings who are attempting to be fascist cunts. The shitheads in the small states, the rednecks and fuckheads, should be called what they are: losers, pitiful cripples, who have to break the political system to gain any kind of control or power, and all they are fascist motherfuckers. And they should be called what they are. We should have a Congress full of people willing to speak their truth, even if their truth is white people is better. Yeah, it should be there. We, the people, should be represented in the Congress, not this bullshit. And clearly, when it comes to an executive getting elected, where there's one man wins, clearly it should matter. It should be one man, one vote. Not this cheat, this horrible, disgusting affirmative action cheat of the Electoral College that gives a bunch of redneck Christian kooks way too much power. The Sarah Palins of the world, and Donald.
And as if, the right idea should eventually win out. Of course, everybody thinks they've got the right idea, so
it should have a chance to win out. The point is, the right idea doesn't even get spoken in the Congress. So you're one step, you're missing the real tragedy. The real tragedy is the majority of people want abortion rights. The majority of people want some sort of reasonable right to die. When is that subject ever discussed in the Congress? Never. Here's a subject where people see it every day, they experience this shit, and it just keeps going on and on and on, and nobody ever fixes it. My parents, I remember them angsting and being all concerned when my grandparents, were dying, and the system and the horrible nursing homes and all this crap, and they had 40 years to do something about it, and they did nothing about it because the political system didn't give them a chance to do anything about it. They were forced to compromise their will or their want for a rational right to die policy because they were given a choice of, here's a cabal of special interests, the Republicans. Well, at least they're not going to spend all your money. And here's the other, these people will give you rights, but they'll steal all your money. And they got given this horrible choice, and in my opinion, they made the lesser, they made the worst choice. And so they threw away rational policy on the right to die to save a few $1,000. And then the problem doesn't get fixed. But the point is it doesn't even get debated in Congress, yet the majority of people, if asked, will answer, yes, this needs to be fixed. That the medical industrial complex is, in fact, out of fucking control.
You're sitting around expecting eventually it'll, work out that my idea is the last standing, because, of course the best idea will be the only one standing.
Well, like I said, if you had a more direct democracy, it might not be the best idea, but it'll be the well-phrased idea, the one that has the prettiest poster child arguing for it, the most celebrity endorsements, let's say, or nowadays, who knows what the most guys holding up their 9mm. Who knows what moves people, motivates people now. What charms them. It certainly doesn't look like it's anything that charms me. The men are getting stupid, the women are getting fatter. I don't get any of it. But anyway.
And they spend a lot of time convincing others and have a lot of faith in that. And then when that doesn't...
Again, that's not the argument. The argument isn't having faith in democracy in that sense. The argument is having faith in a fair fight. And saying, well, look, I don't mind losing a fair fight. I'm a man. I can take it. Okay, if I didn't make a good enough argument, I didn't make a good enough argument. It's the fact that we're not even allowed to make the argument in this democracy. So again, you can't call what we have now in any reasonable sense a democracy, because it doesn't represent either the majority or the majority's ideology. So maybe you need to have something more direct in terms of the democracy, or something. You need more elements in this thing to compensate against all of the chicanery that's in it. The fact that a citizen of California has 30 times less power in the Senate than a citizen of Alaska. Now, how is that anywhere close to representing one man, one vote? It's a complete sham. And all policy has to go through that Senate. So every one of these things that are false democracies, like the Senate, completely false, nothing's being represented but except some stupid idea of calling it a state and giving it 2 representatives, no matter how many people live there, that thing is a sham. It's a disgusting fraud and a fake. You can't call that democracy. If that was the only representative body we had, everybody would understand how that's not nearly good enough. And the truth is, we end up with the default is that any impediment you put in the road is an impediment. If I put steel spikes in 1 foot of pavement on the highway, it doesn't matter if 5 miles of highway don't have steel spikes in it, because the steel spikes are going to flatten the tires. And the Senate is a tire flattener. Nothing policy-wise can get ever implemented without going through the worst compromise institution that exists. And so the Senate kills all rational legislation. And it just becomes the legislation of the kooks and the fucking self-interested rednecks of the little states. The people still living in an archaic, false reality. Still working as blacksmiths or something.
Work out, they get really frustrated, but they never give up this idea that, the point is to convince others. Right, that's actually...
No, the point is to have a fair fight. I suppose, idealistically, if you're really going to go all the way, yes, the ideal of having argument is to resolve dispute eventually and to have some sort of dispute resolution. But again, I don't think you could have that expectation with the process we have, because how could the debate possibly work when the subjects that most people want to have debated aren't even on the table to be debated.
A dangerous idea, and it's very anti-American because it's anti-individualistic. It's anti-democracy. Democracy, my view of democracy, and I think really it's an inherent part of the whole point of democracy, is that we're not all supposed to agree. It's a system.
Well, no, I don't think that's true either. I think democracy is you have to have somebody make rules. So the commons don't get protected without government. So there's necessary elements of government, and there's huge efficiencies to doing things in some sort of standardized and regulated manner. So yes, there's just no point in having, again, if we didn't have regulation, back in the initial days of cable TV or something like that, I mean, all the telephone poles would have been falling down because everybody would have to put their own cables, and everybody would have to put their own infrastructure, and it just can't work that way. So yes, you have to engineer a civilization, and the democracy is where we attempt to put the best engineers in place to do the job, and obviously that's not what these people are. We're not given the choice to elect intelligent people. We're just given the choice to elect people who are willing to lie, because they're the only people who will be supported by the coalition parties. The parties are coalition parties, and you must essentially be an idiot to believe the platform of either party.
That we use to peacefully have differences, right? And ideally, a federated system would be a way to deal with this in the United States. If the whole country can agree on something, fine. The whole country could share.
Yeah, well, we've already been there and done that. So, in the sense, we built the Hoover Dam. So obviously, there was a time when the federal government was much stronger than it is now, and so, I mean, I personally have absolutely no interest in preserving the New Jersey state border. I just couldn't care less about this idea. This whole idea of segregating people to me is obnoxious. So I don't want anything that encourages segregation, in any mass way. And I don't see any hope for us as to get anything done. I mean, the more power you give to the states, then the more they're in competition with each other. And right now there exists this stupid competition between Pennsylvania, Connecticut, New York. So they'll increase gas taxes, they'll decrease taxes on this, they'll give corporations huge incentives to locate in their state. All the shenanigans that goes on. They'll try to get people to, they'll give less welfare so they don't have the welfare people come to their state. All these very negative competitions that are just totally corrosive. So, but again, that's not really the subject of democracy, about how many levels of government we should have. So, yeah, I think the fewer levels, the better. And the more consistent the standards, the better. Everybody should be voting on the same technology. There should be human rights protected. And, this whole states' rights thing is corrosive to a capacity to identify ourselves as, first and foremost, human beings. Well, I'll add to this. I'm not going to play Piero's whole video because it's, the subject is a little more complicated than his video is angled at. I mean, they're separate subjects. Again, this isn't a subject you can just make generalizations about. You have to deal with these specific elements. But anyway, I watched the movie. I hadn't seen it in years. Was Meet John Doe. I just happened to crash into it because of some physics guy, and I'm saying, who's this asshole? And then I saw he had these classic movie channel he was subscribed to, so I ended up looking at all these really crappy old free movies, and there was an actual good one in the pile of free movies. Anyway, so yeah, it's all dated, but the funny thing is, it's exactly the same problem. So here's a movie made even before World War II, I think. So here's a movie made before World War II, talking about the corruption, the shit, how life sucks in a sense. You know, it's a big sham, a ripoff. The politicians are all liars. You know, and so this, you know, and the story is kind of like, okay, a guy's going to jump off a government building to demonstrate his contempt for the system. You know, this is back in the 30s, and you know, and the joke of it sort of is that if somebody said, I'm going to do that today, no one would give a shit. So it's like you can't even die for the cause in any kind of real way. Setting yourself, you know, you can pour all the gasoline on yourself you want to, and they'll just, you know, the street sweeper will just, you know, throw your remains into the sewer. No one could give a damn. And, you know, so we're almost in a, it's just the irony of it is that this is a problem that's existed for a long time, and the system isn't going to fix the system. So somehow people do have to do some kind of third-party thing with a very limited agenda of just actualizing our rights. First, we have to secure our rights before we can exercise our rights. So that's kind of the joke here. We need a party where we're just concerned about fixing the democratic process. And then we can have a democratic process. You know, and then we can talk about the issues and realize how to resolve them through a mixture of representation and direct democracies, a check and balance. Even the Electoral College could have some validity if it was just used as a way of saying, look, if the popular vote and the Electoral College vote don't match, then the president is only president for 1 year, and then he has to get reelected or something. Or you just say, look, we're just going to do the election over. In 2 months, we're going to vote again. And if it comes out the same way, then you have some sort of Supreme Court decision or some other way to resolve it. But I just mean, it should just be an indicator of a failure of your democracy, that those two results don't match, that you're in trouble, okay, that people are in a dangerous situation where 50% of us, you know, hate the other 50%, and there's got to be a rational response to that. But the rational response isn't to put a dictator in charge, a guy who lost the popular vote. That seems really dumb.
Rule, a regulation, law, a way of life. And if they don't, then, you know, smaller units can find agreement, right? And then only those units that find a certain amount of agreement go ahead and use that. Maybe they convince us.
All right, so this is where I'll end it, because, you know, Pirro ruins the subject by talking about this idea of breaking up into states or regions or some other things, this idea that we have segregated ideology, and in my opinion just completely misses the real failure of our democracy. It's exactly the opposite thing not being recognized, is that our ideology is not segregated. Okay, and the only thing you're going to be able to segregate on in any obvious way is wealth, you know, gated community state, you know, welfare versus welfare state versus foreigner state. I mean, you're not going to be able to segregate us physically on anything but these extreme issues, and they're going to create extreme divisiveness. Because yes, right next door to the no child labor state is going to be the, yeah, well, it's okay if you pay them 25 cents an hour. Then kids can work in the cement factory. It's okay. So yeah, that's just not going to work. I think he even brought up some other labor issues and stuff in this video, and it's just so annoying, as if I'm defending the destruction of wages. When every video I have made, I'm constantly talking about the rights of workers and their entitlement to be paid. That workers should be paid, not rich people. This is the asshole, him. He's the asshole, him, who defends entrepreneurs and this whole fucking capitalist ownership society bullshit. That's his game. That's not my game. So fuck that cunt for that. But this whole idea that you can, you know, somehow if we bring the slaves home, you know, if we bring the slave wages home, that somehow that's going to make America great again. You know, let's bring back, you know, let's create the 16-hour workday, and let's create the no workman's comp, and let's create the, yeah, sorry, your arm got cut off, no health care, too bad, fucker. Let's create all that here so we can be competitive in the world. That just sounds so fucking brilliant. So it's just stupid. You can't bring it home and fix it that way. It's just a dilemma. All right? I mean, either you fix the world or you're fucked. And that's it. There's no other choice. You know, it has to be a world fix. It can't be we're just going to pretend that the problem doesn't exist and that we can make iPhones that are just as competitive in the world with people getting $25 an hour in benefits and salary. That ain't going to fucking happen. I mean, even if you pay 10 people $10 an hour in salary as a minimum wage, you still know the social benefits are at least another $10 an hour, where they're not in China. And everybody knows that. So that's the fraud here. You got to count the benefits. Anyway, that's a whole nother subject, so I don't want to, I'm just not going to, try not to make hour-long videos about politics, only about philosophy. So anyway, we'll see how this came out. I like this idea. It's a way of responding to videos. So I think this will be the future, maybe even 3 cameras of me, and just one of them. Maybe 2 of me, and then them in the middle. Yeah, we'll see. I love broken crap. $5. Yeah, it's just, it works. $5. Till next time.